And today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the David Kurten Show here on today's News Talk TNT, and it is really good to have with me in the studio this morning Mario Ineko, who runs the YouTube channel Maneko64. And Mario has been working in the city for, I think, 20 years and is an expert in financial markets and economics. Welcome to the show, Mario.
Thank you, David. Nice to be here.
Well, thanks for coming in on Easter Monday, because it is a bank holiday Monday today in the UK. But you've written some very interesting things, and you said some very interesting things on your YouTube channel. And one recent video you did was about the UK establishment is looking to destroy the economy and impoverish you. I think that was the title of a video you did. And it was about net zero and this net zero policy. It's something we talk about a lot on the show here. But why do you think that this is so damaging?
Well, many people don't know that the Climate Change Act of 2008 was passed then, and mainly because we had a financial crisis. So everyone was looking at the banks while they passed that act, and only 5 MPs voted against it, which is a bad sign when the House is so unanimous about something. And the reason I think it's bad is because it's subsidizing companies that would otherwise not be economical, and that the free market would not levitate or go towards, like the renewables. And I think it's one of the reasons why we had the energy crisis in 2021, 2022. It was all, if you remember, all the energy companies, the small energy providers, they went bust way before the events of Ukraine and Russia. And yes, all this policy of setting up these renewables, these targets, which really are very difficult to reach. I think 84% of the world's energy is still based on fossil fuels or hydrocarbons. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of our bills go up. We're seeing here in Greater London the ULEZ charge, making it harder and harder. But I think politicians, they live in the bubble, and they don't realize how people are struggling. And that's why it might not be on purpose that they're making the general public poorer, but it might be because of good intentions, but their good intentions are anything but. And to subsidize all this new renewable energies, electric vehicles, and everything else is going to cost a lot. And they're going to put the tab on us, and they're going to subsidize these huge corporations who are in bed with this net zero agenda.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I didn't know how few MPs voted against this. I mean, I'm aware of the Climate Change Act. I mean, I'm lead of the Heritage Party, and our policy is that we would repeal it immediately. That's one of the first things we would do, because it's a disaster, and it's the government interfering in the free market. They've said, I think originally it said that we would need to cut our carbon dioxide emissions by 80% by 2050. And then Theresa May came along later on, and she introduced a statutory instrument in 2018 saying that, no, it won't be 80%. Now we need to go to 100% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. So this is where the net zero policy came in. And they want to do this by 2035 or something. You know, they brought the date forward. I mean, it is, blatant interfering in the free market, and from the Conservative Party in government that is supposed to be for the free market. I mean, this doesn't make sense to me.
No, and I learned about the Climate Change Act only 2 years ago, because I interviewed Lord Lilly, or Peter Lilly, who was one of the MPs who voted against the Climate Change Act. And he told me that it's financing companies that are not really, they're loss leaders. And Theresa May, she was the one who set price caps for these energy companies. And when we saw natural gas in 2002 go through the roof, these companies they couldn't hedge. They didn't hedge, and they couldn't raise their prices for the consumers, so they went bust. And a lot of companies that were still operating, they had to take all the customers and pass on the cost to their existing customers. Yeah, and the reason I spoke about this, it was yesterday. I did my Sunday live stream about the topic that you mentioned in the beginning, was because I saw an article in the Telegraph saying that the Tories are saying that Labour would accelerate the net zero. Because now Sunak has pushed it to 2035. And I think it's all theater. They're both, it doesn't really matter what party, unfortunately, is in power. They all seem to be determined to go with this agenda. Of course, it emanates internationally from like places like the United Nations, World Economic Forum, and net zero is become and the climate, narrative has become very censored. It's very difficult to talk about it on YouTube, but the facts tell us that it's alarmist, and it's something that, in my opinion, is used for government to gain more and more control of the public. I mean, there's just one statistic that discredits it, in my opinion, that carbon dioxide is 0.04% of the atmosphere. So 400 parts per million. If you know that, you should question it. But I don't think we're going to be hearing about that on the BBC and other mainstream outlets.
No, they're not. They're alarmist, aren't they? And they're catastrophist, and they are stoking up fear about this in order to try to change our behavior. And what you said in the first section there was that some of the people who are MPs perhaps don't actually realize the unscientific nature of climate alarmism. They just go along with it because they're told, oh, you need to do this to save the planet. And that's what kids are taught in school. I was a school teacher before I got into politics. I taught chemistry, which was mercifully free of propaganda at the time, but you'd see lessons in geography, and you'd see lessons in PSHE and citizenship, and where they push this narrative all the time that there's a consensus that the planet is going to burn and boil and catch fire. And it's just absolute nonsense. But some people, or a lot of people in politics, really have such a poor understanding of maths and science that they don't actually look into it. And I think that's a bit of a danger there.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but what I know about science is that it's based on facts, not consensus. You could have 95 scientists agree on something, and then one scientist finds a fault and can prove it with data and experiment, and it's not consensus anymore. And I think this climate religion, what they do is they discredit those who question it, who have the data, and they just finance the people that go along with the consensus. And what it does is that it encourages young people and businesses to go along with it, because if they don't follow the consensus, they are out of a job, or if you're young and just starting out, you'll get nowhere. And unfortunately, that's where we are.
It so disturbs me here, being a scientist, having a science background, to see science so warped by this climate alarmist ideology, because it isn't real science, and people are questioning this, and a lot of it is based on modeling. So you got the IPCC modeling with an algorithm that if this happens and that happens, the temperatures might go up by 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Therefore, we need to do this and this, and put not just, do things, but put billions and billions and maybe even trillions of pounds, dollars and euros to as you say, companies that would fail if they had to survive in the free market. And that also is disturbing because we're paying for it. It's taxpayers' money. It's been taken from us who are productive, and then this money is being redistributed by the government to companies that are getting subsidies to produce things which are of no use to anybody, really.
Yeah, it's giving the wrong signal to not just companies, but to young people, to people who work. They're gonna try to get a job in that sector, and it might do well for the next 5, 10 years, but eventually, I think it will just all implode. And aside from the science um, conundrum or this climate change agenda, we have to look at the economics as well and the fiscal situation in this country. And it's not just the government that has huge debts. It's also things like the public sector. I was reading the other day, we've got the public sector has 2.6 trillion pounds, which is basically a little more than the GDP of the UK in unfunded, their pensions. And these pensions are unfunded. How are we going to pay for that? 2 years ago, when we had the crisis in September of 2022, they call it the Kwarteng trust crisis. And I think it was much more than that. We saw that defined benefit pensions in the private sector almost collapsed. So the whole financial system is so leveraged already. And unfortunately, the politicians, they don't see this, they don't understand it, and they think that we can, put the economy in an even bigger hole by financing things that are not going to be productive. Yeah, and that's why either they are ignorant, or many of them probably know it, but they don't care because they're doing well. Their MPs' salaries are going up above the rate of inflation. And I say this because I think the real rate of inflation is a lot higher than we're told. The ONS changed the methodology back in May of 2022 and on the CPI. And I would say it's probably more than 1% higher than they're telling us.
Yeah, I think so. There's so many different ways of calculating inflation now. I hear there's something called core inflation, which doesn't include food and energy, which is like ridiculous because that's what most people spend their money on. And so it's just, I laugh about it, but it's if I didn't, I'd cry because it's just so deplorable and it's such a mess. But, I wonder if some people are there who are MPs and they know it's going on and they know that the country's economy is about to crash. I mean, you say, we've got 2.6 trillion of debt in the UK. I think in the USA, it's $34 trillion and it's growing by about 4 trillion every year. I mean, that's completely unsustainable. And some people are just gouging out what they can before the end comes. But I mean, to me, it's just the parties you've got are their idea, their policy on economics is they'll spend more and then borrow more and then they'll tax more today and tomorrow, when what they actually need to do is spend less and not give money to these companies that are not going to survive in the free market.
Yeah, it's almost like back in the 20s and 30s, that Italian leader, he devised a system where the government and the corporations work together, and that's what we're seeing. And like you said, the tax burden is huge. It's the biggest in 70 years. And the more we do this, the more we hurt the small businesses. I mean, Germany, for example, their economy boomed after World War II because of the small businesses. Small businesses really help. But unfortunately, this globalist World Economic Forum agenda is to destroy the small businesses and have a few monopolies running everything. And I think that's the way we're headed, unfortunately, unless there's a total currency collapse, not just of the dollar and the pound, and these people can't finance these silly projects anymore.
As you talk a lot about gold and silver as well, and that's very interesting. Do you think that they could make a comeback as a currency that we use, that then people wouldn't be able to create their own debt out of nothing?
That's right. I mean, this is one of the things I cover most on my channel. I started buying gold back in '02, and I learned all about the history of gold and silver, of money. And if you go back from the end of the Napoleonic Wars until 1914, this country was on a gold standard. So the amount of currency in the system had to be backed somewhat by gold. I think it was about 30 to 40%. And CPI from that period, from 1821 to 1914, averaged minus 0.1 every year. So there was no inflation. And I would say that this country didn't do that badly during that period.
I think that was some of the best times we've had in this country. I mean, I wasn't alive there, but it sounds like far better than what we have today in terms of our currency, because every year the value of the pound goes down. If you compare what you can buy now in terms of purchasing power, it's about half of what it was 20 years ago. So really, clearly, we need to do something different. I mean, just quickly, something that interests me is this idea of the Bradbury pound. We don't have much too long, but do you think that might be a solution as well?
I've looked into the Bradbury pound, and I don't think so, because the Bradbury pound was like implemented during World War I as an emergency, right. And it's basically the government printing the currency. Yes, there's no debt attached or interest, but would you really want to trust the government printing money out of thin air? I think the solution is sound money, to have gold and silver, and limit not just the bankers, but the government from spending too much and borrowing too much.
I think that's very wise, and that's a good place to leave it. So, I mean, that is perhaps, hopefully, we will get some people in Westminster who are going to turn around from this debt-based system and all the craziness of funding climate alarmism back to sound policy and sound money. Let's hope so. Mario, thank you so much for joining me today on today's News Talk TNT.